All right, hello everyone. This is our third lecture now that you'll have before you come to school on the 19th. This is the founding of Jamestown. This picks up from the exploration one that we last had. And this really gets us now into the study of American history and the beginning, the founding of what will eventually become known as the United States of America, with the first English permanent settlement of Jamestown. Now, when we think of the English colonization, as I said in the last video lecture, England was late coming to this party, as it were. You know, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French were already out there. England had to overcome a lot of internal struggles, political and religious. But by the late 1500s, things began to settle down. And in 1603, Queen Elizabeth I dies, and James I now becomes King of England. James especially is very interested in establishing overseas colonies because he wants to compete with the Spanish. He believes that Spain does not have the military capability of defending much of its colony, especially the claims that they do have in North America. So he feels that it's appropriate this time. Unfortunately, the English crown really does not have the money itself to establish colonies. So these independent private companies emerge, like the Virginia Company. As we talked about in the last slide, this was a joint stock company of these gentlemen and merchants and even knights that had pooled their money together to form this company. Now they had to go before the king, though, and get permission. You just couldn't, living under a monarchy, you can't just go out yourself and start looking for colonies. You have to get permission. So they create a formal petition before the king, and he grants them what's called a charter. So they get the Charter of the Virginia Company is formed. A charter is simply a land grant or right to land. And in this case, King James I gave them the rights to 6 million acres of land in what is going to be called Virginia. Here is an advertisement for Virginia, trying to advertise individuals to come and to for adventure and to find a second chance in life, as it were. As we mentioned earlier, with overpopulation and high unemployment happening in England, many individuals are going to see a better chance to leave and go to the New World. But what is it that they'll be able to find there? What are the things that they're looking for? Well, obviously in the beginning, they're going to think that they can find gold, but it's more important to that. One of the things the investors argue is there's three main points here that they're going to be able to satisfy. First, it's going to provide work for the poor and the homeless. That's a reason to go. There's a lot of poor in England. There's a lot of homeless in England. So this will help alleviate a lot of this. Also, England is going through the very early beginnings of a textile industrial revolution. They are starting to produce a lot of goods, but they need markets for these goods. Europe is closing off a lot of its markets to other European countries. Again, this idea of mercantilism is emerging, this new economic system. By establishing these overseas colonies, they'll also now create markets for their goods. But most importantly, these individuals were hoping for a very quick profit. They could invest their money in this joint stock company of Virginia. They can get enough colonists to go over there, and somehow, some way, either they find gold or they find some other raw material that's over there that's going to be of great value, and they can earn their profits really quickly this way. The irony of all of this is these initial investors will actually never see a single penny in profit. It will, the first several years, be a complete disaster for them, and eventually the crown will take over and turn it into a royal colony. But let's talk now as to where they're heading over there. Again, it's also the ideas of trying to guarantee to these colonists that if you leave England, right, you're going to leave England, you're going to go to the New World, we're going to guarantee that you still have the same rights as an Englishman as though you stayed in England. And that's what they start to tell them in 1606 when this charter is given and they get ready to set sail. But this will not hold true as Englishmen start to go there, and eventually by the hundreds, then by the thousands, then by the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands, eventually a type of stigma will happen. They'll be, especially as they start having children, they'll be known as colonists, and they will not be given all the rights of an Englishman as they start to populate the New World. This provision, though, was incorporated into the documents, the charters, and all the other colonies that eventually will emerge as well. They will promise them the rights of an Englishman. But this won't really happen the way that they're promised. Colonists will feel that even in the Americas, they had the rights of Englishmen, but as you'll come to see over the next several generations, these rights that they thought they had will not really happen. All right, so let's talk about Jamestown itself. They arrive in December, well, they leave in December of 1606. They left in 3 ships. They don't arrive until off the coast of Virginia until April 26, 1607. So 1607 is considered the year of the founding of Jamestown. Now, you can probably guess why they named this Jamestown. It's in honor of King James. And they build, as you see here, a fort. It's 144 men who come. These 144 men. And there's a reason why they're going to build this in a fort. The Spanish claim this area. So the Spanish are never going to be happy as the English are coming here. And they're always going to be looking for the right moment to attack them. It will never happen. The Spanish actually will never attack. But there are plans to attack. And also the Indians. There are Native Americans who live in the area. And the English are pretty sure that they're not going to be happy with them all of a sudden just coming into their territory, as we're going to talk about here in a few moments. So this was for protection. What they didn't bring with them, though, is they really didn't bring any farming equipment. They brought equipment to search for gold and pan for gold and silver, to perhaps dig for other precious metals, obviously military equipment to protect themselves, but they brought no seed, they brought no livestock, they brought nothing to actually farm the land with, which will turn into a great disaster for them. Again, 144 different men will land here. Now, these are all men who come in 1607. And it turns into a nightmare very quickly. These are not men who are used to working. These are not men who are farmers, who are tillers, or anything like that. And no one seems to want to do what's necessary in order to survive. And so they start to die by the dozens within a few months. These were gentlemen colonists. They didn't have calluses on their hands because they never worked a day in their life. And this is going to turn into, like I said, a great disaster for them here in the first few years of Jamestown. The irony of all of this is there's plenty of food all around them. There's game in the forests. There's deer. Right? There's plenty of deer out there. There's other animals that are edible. There's plenty of fish in the river. But these colonists didn't know how to do any of this. And so they began to starve and they began to die. They spent way too much time in the beginning looking for gold instead of doing any hunting or farming. And in 1607, 1608, you have the first of the starving times happen during the winter. When winter comes and you have nothing to eat, and now it's snowing, and whatever crops are growing naturally in the area have died, and game has left, and the rivers have frozen over, and you couldn't even fish if you wanted to now. Dozens of them will start to die at this time period. Now, there was one gentleman that they brought with them that was supposed to help them. This is Captain John Smith. As you can see, a very beautiful looking man. Big old Jebediah beard. Now, perhaps some of you out there, I would assume, especially the young ladies, have seen the Disney movie Pocahontas. Anything you may know of John Smith and Pocahontas, I'm pretty sure is absolutely 100% incorrect. John Smith is a mercenary. He was fighting wars in Europe when he heard of this exploration to the New World, and he was interested in coming over and perhaps making some money and maybe even fighting Indians. And he got very, very tired of the men he was working with. A quote from his book where he says, "There was no talk but dig gold, wash gold, refine gold, load gold." That's all he heard from these men, and they were dying all around him. Now, he knew how to hunt, he knew how to fish, he knew how to take care of himself, so eventually, by the late summer, early fall, he will leave these men. Now, the Powhatan people, actually the first time I've mentioned this, the Indians in the area were known as Powhatan, named after their Chief Powhatan. That's what the English called them, by the way. They had already been attacking the English. They started attacking them in May and in June. By late June, the attacks began to stop. And the Englishmen asked John Smith to go out and perhaps make a treaty with the Indians because they're desperate for food. Now, eventually he gets captured. In December of 1607, they actually capture him. And this is one of these moments in history where a lot of people aren't really sure, well, what exactly happens here. Here you see this engraving of, there's Captain Smith laying on a rock, and there's Chief Powhatan standing over him, and there's one of his warriors. He has what looks like a club of some sort in his hand. He's about to smash his brains all over the rock, and Powhatan's young daughter, Pocahontas, races in, jumps on him, claims that she's in love with him, and saves his life. No. This event does happen. He is captured. He is put through this, but this is actually an adoption ceremony. What the Powhatans are doing is they want a treaty with the English. I'm going to do a whole different lecture later on just the Powhatans and their experiences they have with the English, and eventually what is known as the Anglo-Powhatan War that will take place in 1610. They are very familiar with Europeans. I think sometimes we get this idea from the cartoons and the movies that when the Europeans arrived, all these natives were just amazed. Oh, who are these white figures coming out of these floating vessels on the water? No, the Spanish had already been in this area. The Dutch have already been in this area. And many English fishermen have been in here for probably 50 or 60 years. So the native people here were very, very familiar with Europeans, and especially the Spanish. And to the south, there is a powerful Indian nation known as the Cherokee, and they have allied themselves with the Spanish. Powhatan is aware of all of this. He wants a European ally himself, and this is a good opportunity. He is, in essence, adopting John Smith, and in his mind, in his culture, adopting all these white English into his tribe, and thereby making them all Powhatan. And now we can have a treaty with these Europeans and help protect us from the other Indian tribes, the other Europeans that are in the area as well. And of course, the English here will also benefit because now food will start to come into the encampment. By the way, this is an engraving that was done in 1616 of Pocahontas. We'll talk about her quite a bit. Actually, a very, very important person in the early history of America. And I'm going to talk about her in another lecture later on. She eventually will marry an Englishman, but she does not marry John Smith. She was 11 years old when this took place. There is no way she is going to marry a man who is probably in his late 30s, early 40s at this time period. But later on, another Englishman will come when she's in her teens, and he's only in his 20s, and that's John Rolfe. And we'll talk about that later on. And their marriage is actually very, very important to American history. But again, let me tell you just a little bit too here. This is this first year that these Englishmen here are at Jamestown. And it's going poorly for them. Only 38 of the original 144 men survived this first year. And it's basically because of what John Smith does here by allying himself with the Powhatan people. Food starts to flow into this little colony at Jamestown. John Smith puts up a famous sign where he says, "He who will not work will not eat." So he put everybody finally to work to fortify the fort, to clean up their living conditions, and then food started to come in. By 1608, another ship with about 120 new settlers arrive, but John Smith is sick and he'll have to leave. And then by 1609, another ship will arrive, this time with over 500 colonists. Now you're having men and women, and even some children are starting to come here. Powhatan is starting to see this as something he didn't expect. There are more and more white people arriving in his territory, and they're going to want more and more land. And they're going to continue to take more and more land from the Powhatan people. And by 1610, you're going to have full-on war will develop. But war wasn't the only thing that began to take the lives of the English. Disease and starvation. In 1609, 1610, there's going to be a second starving time is going to happen, which is going to be worse than the first one. In fact, a very bizarre, macabre story that actually took place here is it got so bad, they were starving so bad, and hundreds of them began to die, that one man actually murders his own wife and then eats her. I mean, that's how bad it starts to get here amongst the English. By 1610, there were over 500 colonists that had arrived between 1608 and 1609. By 1610, there were only 60 of them left. And they were in terrible, terrible poor condition. And they're at war as well with the Powhatan people. It looks as though this is going to turn into a complete abject failure for the English. But in 1610, in October, another ship will arrive, this time with soldiers on it, with direct orders to stay and to fight. And from that point on, it is full-on war between the English and the Powhatan in Jamestown. And that actually will bring us to an end to this lecture. And I'll talk more about the English and the Powhatan people in another lecture, but I will wait to do that one once you guys come back to school. But that will be in a video presentation as well. All right, so looking forward to seeing everybody. But actually, I have one more slide I forgot. I wanted to show you, well, this is Culture Clash. I'm not going to do that right now, but here are some questions I want you to take a look at. And this is the third video now you've watched. And I want you to think of these questions here and think if you can answer any of them yet. What events in Europe, and I should have this as Europe's past, do you believe will have an impact on Native Americans? Were some of the things that we've talked about, especially in the first slide, what are some of the things that happened early in European history that you think might have an effect on Native Americans? What are some things you do not know yet about this time period that you think might help you to better understand what's going on? I've rambled here quite a bit over these 3 videos, but maybe there's still some things that you are thinking, well, I don't know this or I don't know that yet. Well, what are they? And can you make any connections yet to the 2 previous lectures to this one? If so, what exactly are they? So as you're thinking about that, no, I don't want you to answer that now. I mean, I wouldn't be able to get the answer from you if right? That'd be ridiculous. So when you come back to school, or when you arrive to school on Monday the 19th, I'll probably ask you some of these questions and see how many of you have actually been watching the videos. Eventually, I'm going to actually create a video log sheet that you'll actually have to fill out for me and explain some of the things that you have been listening to and some of the things that you find very, very important and interesting, maybe even some of the things that you really don't care about. I mean, we're going to be open and honest throughout the course of the year here. All right, so I appreciate you listening again. I hope you took some notes. And again, I look forward to seeing all of you Monday the 19th.